So dudes, you might be surprised to see what Rainbow Six Siege maps and Formula 1 tracks have in common. If that's the case, what's the Monaco of Siege, I wonder? Map reworks, why they happen, the history of them, what's the point, and all that jazz. We'll be taking a look at game design, some concise overviews of different maps, what makes a map good in an FPS game, and what makes a Formula 1 track good, briefly. The need for redesign and evolution is crucial in a game like Siege. The challenges involved in redesigns are heavy, and community reactions can dictate a lot of what Ubisoft does. We'll also talk about the future of redesigns as we know them. But before we do that, I want to transition, and that's why in this video, I've partnered with DraftKings. Guys, it's sports ball season, and you know what that means as existential pain. But if your team isn't making any dubs, you can savor the action regardless with DraftKings, the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL. New customers can play for free at a shot of their share of millions with a first deposit minimum of $5. Playing is easy. Just draft your roster, and those players will earn points based on how they do during the big game. Like how I drafted a team's defense in 2019 and enraged everyone in my DFS league. Skill issue. But seriously, it creates a narrative throughout the season and some funny stories to share with your friends if you're into sports. Impress or significantly irritate everybody with your big brain game knowledge and sports ball number crunching acumen. Now's a good time as any. And you heard that right. Just a first deposit of $5 for new customers, and you can compete for millions in total prizes. Download the DraftKings app and use my promo code GGE to join in. That's promo code GGE only at DraftKings. Okay. So a hugely important characteristic of designing a Rainbow Six Siege map is its destructibility. Rainbow Six Siege is a game that almost entirely revolves around its destructibility. Destructibility is important in this game because where you put a hole can be the difference between a safe rotation for you to go from bunks to games to a free angle an attacker on top white can hold your trophy player from, or even your attic player from. The only difference, you were aiming here instead of here when you made the rotate. Siege is basically the world's most complicated geometry problem, and it's important that each map in Rainbow Six Siege is accommodating of the millions of different little possibilities players can get into. I don't know if you know this, but little numbers can turn into lots of numbers real quick. We call those combinations. And there is essentially a limitless amount of combinations to do in this game. That's part of what drives people away, but it's also part of the appeal. A good Siege map has plenty of modularity and different ways to do the same thing, but not in a way that feels unfair or with no outplay potential. A similar thing can be said for Formula 1, where a good track relies on some lawn straights and heavy braking zones to emphasize the ability for cars to overtake and make flashy plays. It gives you options to make the sport exciting and engaging to watch. Tracks made a long time ago tend to not have as many straightaways because the cars would have taken 5 million years to make that same amount of distance. In particular, I don't think Baku would work in the year 1967. Just the brakes alone would get worn out really quickly. There are lots of conversations to be had about Monaco for being too small and not very accommodating of bigger, wider, and faster cars. Nighthaven Labs is an example of the new school of Siege design philosophy, as opposed to Plain, which, as far as I know, is the oldest map in Siege. This map is confined. The amount of destruction is relatively limited. It obviously has a novel premise of being a tube-shaped map, basically a bunch of corridors stacked on top of each other, and the gameplay is somewhat unique as a result of this, but Plain doesn't really work as a competitive map because it's more of a fun design experiment than anything. Siege maps were a lot smaller and a lot more claustrophobic, because, frankly, people were not expected to look as far down for lines of sight. Everything was assumed to be tight and confined. This made for less options in terms of destruction you could work as an attacker, and less options for setups you could do as a defender, since the actual scale of what you could destroy was smaller. Siege maps nowadays emphasize longer sight lines and a lot more options, paths for the attackers to take to make certain kinds of plays. This also somewhat helps with the defender-sided nature of the game. For an analogy in terms of a Siege map, an F1 driver would look for technical challenge, but also fair opportunities to do overtakes. It makes the race more competitive and exciting for the drivers and fans. This is why tracks usually feature at least 1 or 2 long straights with heavy braking zones where overtaking is common. Think of this in a similar vein to Siege maps, where more destruction means more opportunities for playmaking, both for the defense and the attack. We talk about map flow in FPS games, and they do in F1 as well. Drivers will often describe the flow or rhythm of a track, a flow that feels natural and enjoyable. Sound familiar? A lot of people will use this terminology to describe a disjointed map with lots of corners and maze-like qualities that make it difficult to navigate. We've been with Siege for a long time, but in terms of competitively balancing a sport, let alone a game, the amount of time we've had with Siege isn't really that long. So we've learned a lot in the span of this game's formative development. We understand that the game can't be too tight and constrained. We understand that the average kill distance, for instance, is about 8 meters, the distance of the front to back of a passenger bus. We understand that the flow of the map has to be a certain way. We understand that the map needs to be spacious without being too big and cavernous, but not so tight and claustrophobic that it limits your decision-making ability. We want to give players as many opportunities to interact with the Siege sandbox and make cool plays. Just to give you an idea, let's look at playing ourselves. This is a pretty iconic map. Just the visual design alone evokes a lot of memories for me. But what can we actually do here? We can put a bunch of traps on this corridor, I guess. We could put Fenrirs, Malusis. Crowd control would really work here. Area denial. And you can get creative here. We could do, like, some footholds, I guess. I'm sure there's a million different ways you could set this up. You could probably put a mirror here. You might be able to do an extend here. Yeah. Okay, so I have a pretty nice pixel. That's cool. So yeah, I got a little creative here. But if you had shown me this year 1 of Siege, I wouldn't have had any clue what the heck was going on. We could do a smoke setup here with a reinforced wall. Try it. Okay. So I'm kind of cooking a little bit, but I should probably play a little closer. But this room is so big. Look at how big this room is. Like hardcover here, hardcover here, hardcover here. So let's just actually look at the design of the room. So we have hard wall, or hard floor, I should say. Hard wall, and then you look at the ceiling. So you can shoot out some of it, but you can't shoot out this part. So you can shoot out everything starting here, but otherwise, like down here, you can't. So this staircase is pretty much like, I don't know how you're going to hold this staircase without some kind of really extended roam. But yeah, like, and you can't shoot this part out. So I think this room is the only one you can shoot out. So we have a little bit of destruction here, and we have a wall. And that's kind of it. There's not really a whole lot else you can do. Just look at all the stuff I can do on the new map. You can do a tiny extension here. You could probably put a castle here, and then some head level holes. Okay, cool. So we have a little pivot point in between all of the rooms now, just because there's a couple of walls. We could do a mirror wall here, theoretically, if we wanted to. So boom. Could do a smoke extension. Oh, this pixel is... Yeah, man. Holy crap. And I have hardcover too? Yeah. And then we can go a little bit further out. We could do an extension into here. Maybe I have that on the wrong side. Yeah, I have it on the wrong side. That's going to benefit the attackers more. But okay, so let's pretend that Buck opened this. Yeah, so Buck opened this, and now they have line of sight. They could play... Ooh. Look at that. They could play... Ooh. They could cut off this whole rotate. I'm dead. Wow, yeah, that's crazy. But, lo and behold... Yeah. So, just looking at this, you can see how much more variation we have on this new map. And can usually tell if a Siege map is kind of dated by its lack of destruction. If the gunfighting is tight and confined, and the map just doesn't have a particularly fun or enjoyable flow to it, people will usually complain. There are challenges in redesigning maps and tracks, some of which having to do with the same reason: nostalgia. It took a long time before Consulate eventually got reworked, and it was one of the more recent maps to finally get a modern update. But it is one of Siege's most iconic maps. It teaches the importance of verticality, window play, and staircase control. Monaco, despite being a pretty old track, and I mean old, like first race held in 1929 old, has a huge amount of tradition and legacy. Monaco is considered a part of the Triple Crown of motorsport, alongside the Indy 500 and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. There's a certain kind of tact you need to apply to redesigning a map in so much that it does not involve completely wrecking it. An example of a map rework that got a considerable amount of backlash was the Hereford base rework, which seemed to totally destroy the simple, boxy layout of the map, with one staircase towards the center that led to all the adjacent floors. Lots of little pathways and staircases and windows seemed to create a disjointed, weirdly flowing Frankenstein's map monster. A lot of people were not happy with this version of Hereford and weren't happy with the fact that the old version of the map was rendered completely unplayable. There's a culture around these games, and you can develop an emotional attachment to this stuff. However, there are instances where reworking a map can turn it into a crowd favorite. For instance, Chalet was considered to be a pretty unfun map that was essentially impossible to roam on because the attack could watch all the cutoffs from outside. Then, when it eventually got reworked by blocking off the windows in Fireplace, it was a totally different story. And now Chalet is a very competitive and fun map. The overall reception to reworking maps in Siege, despite the initial onset of criticism that comes with any patch update for this game, myself guilty as charged, usually ends up having a pretty decent track record, believe it or not. If we look at the competitive map pool, the most competitive maps in the game, or at least the competitive maps that we consider good enough to make it into the Pro League rotation, are Border, Chalet, Clubhouse, Bank, Cafe, Oregon, Skyscraper, Consulate, and Nighthaven Labs. Every single one of these maps have had at least some buffs or complete reworks aside from Nighthaven, which is new. And most of them retain a lot of aspects of their flow from previous versions of Siege. I remember Skyscraper in particular was really hurting for that rework. Nighthaven is an entirely new map built from the ground up and fits in the Pro League rotation, so that's a really nice plus. I like all of these maps aside from Cafe in certain aspects, but even then it's still a pretty competitive map. Consulate was a very controversial map when it was in the Pro League rotation before the rework, because it was heavily regarded as a rat map and rife with crazy spawn peaks. Much of control on the map came down to getting control of the windows. Bank had some troublesome window play as well, and weird skylight angles that were patched up. Clubhouse used to look like this. There was a whole section in the middle where the map was still separated. The top floor flow of Oregon was considerably constrained, and the flow of the map is still relatively similar, but it's a lot more open and less congested, allowing for a bit more variation than we were used to seeing. Border also desperately needed touch-ups, with a whole balcony section added that separates the break room from top east. A square balcony is also here that gives defenders another route to go back to break and CC to contest it. As far as the longevity of the game is concerned, Ubisoft gets a lot of flack for the way they handled House, Hereford Base, and other maps, but for the most part, the plan to rework maps over the course of many years has been successful and has benefited the game greatly. Without these reworks, the game would have evolved too quickly and gotten really chaotic really fast. Hell, it already feels quite chaotic and congested now if you got a tuber on the board, but you take what you can get, right? That's the nature of a game like Siege. As long as a baseline level of competitive integrity is ensured, you're usually fine. As far as content in the future is concerned, well, Siege has pretty much touched up every map in the game to various degrees. I'd say the map that most closely resembles the way it used to be is Plain, with some more hard walls added between some of its flooring. I think Plain should stay the way it is though, and my justification for that is as follows. Plain is essentially a museum map. It represents a different era of Siege, an era where the devs were still experimenting and trying to figure out just what they wanted to do with it. They wanted to add a tubular assault map akin to the situations we saw in reality, where CTUs had to get in with their hands dirty and do operator shit for hostage rescue situations. Many people feel that Plain is the closest Siege still has to its initial marketing roots as a tactical shooter, rather than the competitive esports focus it took later on. Now, I think that Siege married aspects of tactical shooters and competitive shooters in a unique and interesting way, but a lot of people don't feel that way, and they let you know a lot. You got Ready or Not if that's what you're into. I understand why the game took its esports focus on later, but the game was about to go to the wayside very quickly. For what it's worth, Plain is kind of a museum map, like I said, a representation of design philosophies where we experimented with realistic scenarios and tried to blend them into video game mechanics. It's a fun map to play just for the heck of it, and I think that it's worth something in and of itself. Plain is not a good competitive map, but it is just an interesting map, an interesting play space that deserves a seat in the hearts and minds of Siege players everywhere, and that's enough for me. We have some other weird novel maps. Yacht has 4 floors, and it's just out here being chilling in the Arctic Circle, and they sent a nuclear submarine at it. I don't know what the heck is happening here. I would love to know the story as to why this Far Cry villain is out here with a yacht, and you got NATO up in here doing operator stuff. Who knows what the future holds for Siege? It seems that they like to lean into the lore that they got going on here. Nighthaven Labs, along with Lair, are pretty much well integrated into this sort of new age kind of approach we had with Siege when Harry first got added to the roster, and then, well, yeah, RIP. Even in Lair, despite some of its problems that I think it has from a constructive point of view, Lair does feature some interesting Easter eggs and, fun little tidbits of information pertaining to the Siege story that I know that the dev team doesn't really have to do, but they did it anyway. And that does show me that they care, even if it's not immediately evident to some people. I would like to see more exploration of this stuff in the future, maybe not necessarily in a PvP environment, but I've been harping on this one for a long time. We all know how Extraction shook out, and, well, I think that's why we're here. Constructively, Lair kind of has a weird flow to it, in my personal opinion. It involves a lot of corner checking, and the look of the map can often feel like the same from one room to the next. I'd be surprised if Lair made it into the competitive rotation, if I'm being 100% honest.
Okay, he's giving me this room. I'm in this room. I'm gonna take it.
Is this sight? I don't know.
Why are there so many random corners? But I do like that Ubisoft is at least trying, and we did have Nighthaven, which is by all standards a pretty good map that got added to the competitive rotation. If we can get at least one good competitive map a year, based off of everything else that Ubisoft is doing, I think that should please most people. If they don't make new maps, then what else are they gonna get flack for? I'll be honest, I don't know how to make a Rainbow Six Siege map. You probably don't either. It's probably one of the most complicated things to do in an FPS game, so I don't envy the devs' position. We'll just have to wait and see what Ubisoft's got cooking up in year 9. If you like this video, be sure to share it with your friends and give it a like. It helps me out a ton. We got How to Play Every Operator 2024 coming out on December 21st, and I can't wait to share that with you all. Until next time, thanks again for watching. Deuces.